Good morning, everyone. What a joy it is to look out and see everybody here. Thank you for coming and joining us today at Humanities Day at the University of Chicago. I'm Martha Roth, I'm Dean of Humanities, and I am indeed very pleased to welcome all of you to this wonderful day, the 31st Annual Humanities Festival, Humanities Day at the University of Chicago, and to this special keynote address today. So welcome to all of you. I'm honored today to introduce to you our keynote speaker this year, who genuinely represents the very, very best of the Humanities Division and of the University of Chicago. David Wellbery is the LeRoy T. and Margaret Deffenbaugh Carlson University Professor in Germanic Studies. David also holds appointments throughout other units of the university, in the Committee on Social Thought, in the Social Sciences Division, in the college, in the Department of Comparative Literature and the Humanities. He is also the chair of the Department of Germanic Studies and the director, in fact, the founding director of the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on German Literature and Culture. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term university professor, the designation that David holds, I want to tell you that there are only two other individuals at the University of Chicago who hold the title university professor. In the history of the university, I believe there have only been 14 such individuals, and David is the only one in the Humanities Division. David's professorship is named in honor of LeRoy and Margaret Deffenbaugh Carlson, and I'm very pleased to have their son and daughter-in-law here with us today. Where are you? There you are. And thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the entire Carlson family for enabling us to bring such an outstanding scholar to the University of Chicago, whose presence daily enriches our lives. David earned his BA from the State University of New York at State University of New York. His PhD from Yale, and then spent a year studying at the Johannes Gutenberg University, Mainz. He then spent 25 years at Stanford University and at Johns Hopkins before coming to the University of Chicago in 2001. David is the author of a dozen books. One of his most well-respected and foundational texts is Lessing's Lo-Kun, Semiotics and Aesthetics in the Age of Reason. Another current, more recent book, again, is Spectacular Moment, Goethe's Early Lyric and the Beginnings of Romanticism. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the German Academy for Language and Literature, both within the last year, inducted David into their ranks. And 8 days ago, last Friday, David went to Germany, where he was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Konstanz. Just another one of the feathers in David's cap, and for which we congratulate him and take a little bit of credit. I want to say never, of course, one to rest on his laurels. David is now hard at work on a book concerning Nietzsche, tentatively titled, I think, The Birth of Tragedy. He has a project on a broad-based study of Goethe and philosophy, and it is this most recent work that he will be sharing with us today. He invites us to contemplate along with him the question, who is Faust? And he will discuss why this romantic drama has fascinated philosophers since its publication and still, of course, merits investigation today. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming David Wellbery.
Last time I was here, out in the audience where you are, Leon Fleischer, the great pianist, was up on the stage, and I have the feeling that this is a drop down from that. spectacular evening. It's a great honor for me to deliver this lecture in the context of Humanities Day at the University of Chicago. I regard the University of Chicago as the real home of the humanities in the United States and one of the great centers of humanistic research in the world, and I am very, very proud to be here as the Carlson University professor and to be here with you all today for Humanities Day. So my title, some of you might know there are two Faust productions this year at Lyric Opera, the Gounod and the Berlioz, and so perhaps this little lecture will feed into other experiences. Both of those are based, one more closely, one more loosely, on Goethe's Faust, of course, and it's Goethe's Faust that I will be talking about here. My title is Who is Faust? I hope you thought the question of that title was a little bit strange. Shouldn't one rather say who was Faust? There was, after all, an historical figure named Georg Faustus, who was born sometime between 1460 and 1470, and died on a day that fell somewhere between 1536 and 1539, his earthly sojourn overlapping then with that of Martin Luther and the German Reformation. He came from Baden in the southwest of modern-day Germany, probably from near the small city of Maulbronn, and studied at the University of Heidelberg, receiving a Magister Artium, roughly our MA degree, in 1487. He seems to have led a vagabond's life, wandering from city to city, plying dubious magical services. A letter of 1507 by a humanist scholar named Johannes Trithemius accuses Faustus of charlatanry, and there are a few other such incriminations. However unscrupulous he might have been, Faustus nevertheless attracted the attention of a few powerful people. The Bishop of Bamberg, for example, commissioned him to draw up a horoscope, as we know from a record of the payment, and the famous knight Franz von Sickingen also sought his services. On the other hand, there are also records of his having been run out of several towns for various sorts of swindles. He was no doubt a conjurer and confidence man who employed his learning, and how deep that learning was we can't say, who employed his learning for the purposes of deception. From the standpoint of my talk today, it is also important to mention that the name Faustus is not an indigenous German family name, but an adopted Latinate moniker. The use of Latin pseudonyms was a common practice among humanist scholars. Faustus means the happy or fortunate one, and this little onomastic fact is, as we shall see, not insignificant. Faust's afterlife is more important than the life itself. He grows in significance with time. His first role is that of an exemplum. His case is taken to illustrate forcefully, even horrifically, the hazards of necromancy and of consorting with the devil. In two of his table talks, Luther mentioned Faust in this sense as a man who took up with the devil in order better to use his magic for the purpose of deceit. Accounts of a terrible end, perhaps due to an alchemical explosion, began to circulate. A cluster of legendary anecdotes formed, no doubt here and there rooted in biographical fact, and in 1587 these tales achieved a canonical compilation in the anonymous chapbook published by Johann Spies in Frankfurt, entitled The Historia of Dr. Johann Faust, the infamous magician and necromancer, how he made a contract with the devil for a specified period of time, the strange adventures he saw or himself experienced or brought about in the interim until he finally received his well-deserved recompense. We do not have time to look at this booklet in detail. Suffice it to say that the central defining feature of the Faust tradition is established here, the idea of a pact with the devil, a contract according to which the devil agrees to serve Faust for 24 years here on earth, placing at Faust's disposal his infernal powers in return for Faust's soul once the agreed-upon stint of service is up. Faust then exemplifies the human being willing to bargain away eternal salvation for the sake of temporal goods, knowledge, power, wealth, pleasure, especially sexual pleasure, and extravagant entertainments. In this sense, his is a cautionary tale, a drastic warning against sinful curiositas, against the blandishments of temporal pleasures, against forgetfulness of the ultimate question of human life, the question of salvation. Such is the moral and theological core of the Faust legend. Spiess's little book was a huge publishing success, achieving 19 reprintings in its first 10 years, translated into several languages and unleashing a wave of imitations that lasted well into the 18th century. The most famous of these, of course, is the tragical history of the life and death of Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe, which appeared in London in 1604, although its composition may have been as early as 1588 and 89, assuming that Marlowe had access to a pre-publication copy of the English translation of Spiess's Historia. Marlowe's play is without a doubt the greatest artistic rendering of the Faust material prior to Goethe. Its importance, in my view, is that it lifted the cautionary tale into the sphere of tragic art, giving the career of the diabolically contracted necromancer an aura of awesome fate that transcends the moralistic cautionary function of the Faust tale in its chapbook dissemination. If one looks at the literary history of the Faust story, then its three artistic high points are certainly Marlowe's play, Goethe's Faust, our subject today, and finally Thomas Mann's great novel of 1947, Dr. Faustus, the life of the German composer Adrian Leverkühn. I'm fond of saying that that was the greatest novel ever written in the state of California. In the first and the last of these three works, the contract with the devil, with its unavoidable end in damnation, remains the crucial plot element. Not the least of the mysteries that Goethe's Faust poses are its two major innovations vis-a-vis the tradition: the transformation of the contract into a wager, and the ultimate salvation of Faust, despite the fact that the play is designated a tragedy. I shall comment above all on the first of these. Now, did you notice how my language slipped from the past tense to the present as I began to talk about Faust's post-mortal career in legend and in fiction? The question, who was, is always an important one for the humanities, which, except perhaps on the formalist frontiers of linguistics and logic, inevitably include an historical dimension. But especially for those of us who deal with the arts and with literature, the question, who is equally important. The question that is, what does this mean for us today? For it is a peculiarity of works of literature that they draw us into their worlds, that we find ourselves reflected in their stories and characters, that their meaning is, in contrast to most of the things we say to one another, not exhausted with its sponsoring occasion, but rather renewed and enriched in subsequent enactments. As strange as it may seem, a work like Goethe's Faust is as much about us here today as it is about the historical context of its production. And it is an important task of the humanities to lend articulate clarity to this presence of the work to us, much as it is the task of an orchestra to make a piece of music come alive tonight, or the task of actors and director to make a play unfold before us in the compelling urgency of now, as our president likes to say. We think of ourselves as interpreting the works of the past, but in a very real sense, they interpret us. They tell us the story of who we are. They measure our heights and depths. They outline for us the patterns of desires and fears that otherwise would remain diffuse and obscure. Goethe was keenly sensitive to this double aspect of art, both historical and present, and he made it a central theme of his Faust drama. For one of the central plot components, of course, is that Faust is an old man who, thanks to the ministrations of the devil and his allied witches, is made young again. With this rejuvenation return as well sexual desire and the capacity to love. Goethe places this theme of vital renewal in a relation of mutual illumination with the poetic process itself, with the making and experiencing of art. For him, the coming into being of art involves the inrush upon the soul of a ghostly past, the coalescence into form of crepuscular spirit shapes. Much as Odysseus gives of his lifeblood to let the shades of the underworld come alive and speak to him once again, so too, such is Goethe's surmise, so too does the poet summon up his own past, his own loves and losses, but also, and intermixed with them, the loves and losses of historic fables, legends, myths. The magnificent centerpiece of Faust Part 2, the third act in which Faust, the quintessential romantic spirit, is united with Helen of Troy, the embodiment of classical beauty, enacts this strange fusion of times that is characteristic of art generally. Helen enters the scene speaking in the stately iambic trimeter of classical tragedy. Now I'm going to cite it in German. Bewundert viel und viel gescholten Helena, vom Strande komm ich, wo wir erst gelandet sind. And now in my hapless translation, admired much, I tried to get the meter. Admired much and so much scolded, Helena, from the beach I come where we just landed now. When Faust enters the scene, he speaks in blank verse, the meter of Shakespeare, of course, but also of the serious high drama of Lessing, of Schiller, and of Goethe himself. And the union of Faust and Helen, I mean the erotic union, the issue of which will be Euphorion, the spirit of poetry, the union of Faust and Helen is dramatized in the adoption on Helen's part of the post-classical romantic technique of rhyme. I'm going to try to read this to you. First Faust will speak, then Helen will speak, and watch how it goes. Faust. And he's celebrating the moment of their being together. Faust. Nun schaut der Geist nicht vorwärts, nicht zurück, die Gegenwart allein, and now Helen, ist unser Glück. You see, she completes the rhyme. She's learned rhyme. Rhyme, of course, is foreign to Greek poetry. She completes the rhyme. She has learned the rhyme that signifies their union. I'll try it in my English translation. Faust, the mind looks neither back nor beyond this present time alone. Helen is our bliss. This is the nature of the artistic process as Goethe understood it, a becoming present of the past, a rejuvenation. The result is a present moment, a Gegenwart, that is uniquely rich and yet shadowed by a ghostliness. Helen is a ghost. By a ghostliness, hence by a penumbra of mourning. Let us note that this very process on Goethe's account takes place within the context of Faust's wager with the devil. And much as Faust's own rejuvenation leads to catastrophe, so too does this episode of artistic renewal eventuate in the Icarus-like fall to death of Euphorion and then the disappearance of Helen. If Goethe has folded his conception of art as the presence of the past into the Faust drama, then art acquires, as part of its very concept, a tragic dimension. This we may take as our first answer to the question, who is Faust? The Faust drama enacts the situation of art in modernity, an art that makes its claim on us within the context of historical consciousness. Such was the view held by Goethe's great contemporary Hegel, whose famous End of Art thesis claims that the experience of art in its full sense, as the sensuously revealed presence of our highest values, is no longer accessible to us. Just to have the concept of art we do, which is an historical concept of art as cultural expression, holds us at a distance from it, and this distance won't be bridged. No matter how beautiful we find a statue, Hegel says, our knee no longer bends before it in reverence of the divine. This dynamic, this desire for an object irredeemably lost, a shade, a ghost from the past, is what is played out in the third act of Faust, Part 2, and to an extent in the entirety of the Faust drama. For a moment, it seems as if the quest has been fulfilled. Faust and Helen look neither back nor forward. They are fully present to themselves and to one another within the moment, and this presence is their Glück, their bliss, as I have translated it to preserve the rhyme, their happiness, more accurately rendered. Recall Faust's name, Faustus, the fortunate or happy one. It would seem that the promise contained in that chosen appellation, nomen est omen, has been fulfilled. But happiness in the sense of consciousness of ultimate fulfillment is not to be had by Faust. Therein resides his tragedy, therein resides ours perhaps as well. But before we can explore this issue more deeply, I must give you some idea of the work's genesis. Goethe's first acquaintance with the Faust story occurred when, as a young boy, he saw a puppet show version of the cautionary tale. In the early 1770s, he began to write his own Faust play, and we are fortunate to have a copy of a version from circa 1775. In the late 1780s, while in Italy, he took up the project once again and published a fragment of it in 1790, but it was only in 1808 that the complete version of Faust Part 1 appeared in an edition of Goethe's collected works. The third phase of work falls in the last half of the 1820s and the beginning of the 30s, which is to say, in the last 7 years of Goethe's 82-year life. This is the phase in which Part 2 comes slowly to fruition, one of the most intricate and complexly elusive texts in the history of European literature. So the span of production time embraces some 60 years with 3 concentrated phases of creative labor, that of a young man in the storm and stress years of his early 20s, that of the mature poet's classical period in his mid-40s to mid-50s, and that of Goethe's difficult, elliptical Altersstil, the style of old age, during his late 70s. Certainly, it is unlikely that a work of such protracted genesis could easily be subsumed beneath a single idea. The writing of Faust extends almost across the entirety of Goethe's life, a life that was rich in transformation. Consider only such turning points in political history as the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire of German nations, all of which immediately touched Goethe's life and profoundly affected his thought. Consider the philosophical revolution inaugurated by Kant and carried out by his idealist successors Fichte, Schelling, Schopenhauer, and Hegel, with all of whom Goethe stood in remarkably fecund intellectual exchange. Or consider the evolution of Goethe's own literary work from the sentimentalism of The Sorrows of Young Werther, 1774, and the storm and stress of his early hymns, to the measured classicism of his dramas, Iphigenia on Taurus and Torquato Tasso, 1787-1790, from his Bildungsroman, Wilhelm Meister's Years of Apprenticeship, 1795, to the tragic Hermetic novel, Elective Affinities of 1809, from the palpable eroticism of Roman elegies, 1795, to the mysterious spirituality and parabolic intimacy of the West-East Divan, 1819. Consider further such formative experiences as the move to Weimar, where Goethe occupied a host of demanding official positions, his sojourn in Italy, his friendship and collaboration with Schiller, and his immersion in botany, animal physiology, and optics, fields in which Goethe made significant discoveries. Consider finally that when Goethe began his Faust, he was an unknown author in an underdeveloped literary milieu, and that, upon its completion, he was the foremost living exemplar of world literary culture, a concept he himself had invented. In short, when one reflects on all that intervened between Goethe's first engagement with the Faust legend and the accomplishment of the work some 8 months before his death on March 22nd, 1832, it is difficult to imagine how his Faust could hold together at all. Certainly it doesn't hold together in the usual sense of formal unity. The play consists of 2 parts, the first of which itself subdivides into the scholar's tragedy, Faust's despair at attaining true knowledge, leading to his baleful alliance with the devil Mephistopheles, and the Gretchen tragedy, Faust's illicit and disastrous love affair with Margaret, called Gretchen. The second part is yet more disparate, consisting of 5 loosely connected acts, each of which takes place in a different sphere of experience. Act 1 shows Faust at the emperor's court, where he orchestrates entertainments, draws Helen of Troy from the abyss of the past, and participates in a bit of financial wizardry, the invention of paper money. Act 2 returns to the medieval study where the play began and where Wagner, Faust's former amanuensis, has succeeded in creating a homunculus, a sort of test tube human spirit. The act concludes with an elaborate and erudite classical Walpurgis night in which Homunculus leads Faust on a tour of rather obscure mythological scenes, culminating in the conception of Helen. In Act 3, Faust finds himself, as we've seen, in ancient Greece, where, in the guise of a late medieval lord, he is joined in love with the beautiful but ghostly Helen, only to see their offspring, Euphorion, fall from the cliffs to his death, at which point Helen, too, withdraws into the depths of nothingness from which she had come. Act 4 is devoted to military exploits, with Faust and Mephistopheles introducing techniques of warfare that secure the emperor's victory. In Act 5, Faust appears as a colonial ruler who undertakes a vast project of engineering, both civil, building dikes to reclaim land from the sea, and social, a utopian community of free individuals. All this ends with the murder of the ancient couple of Philemon and Baucis, for which Faust bears responsibility, and then with Faust's own death, when, blinded by care, he mistakes the sound of the gravedigger's grim labor for the realization of his engineering enterprise. There follows a coda of sorts in which Faust's immortal part is extricated from Mephistopheles' grasp and borne upward through a hierarchy of souls toward the eternal feminine. Goethe once remarked that the Helen act of Part 2 extended from the defeat of Troy to the destruction of Missolonghi, where Byron had died in 1824. In other words, it lasts 3,000 years. But the reach of the entire drama, especially if one takes the natural historical dimension into account, is literally incalculable. The prologue in heaven that precedes Part 1 suggests a vision of the world as it was on the first day of creation, and the ascent of Faust's post-mortal self, with which the drama closes, is directed toward an open future. The unities of place, time, and action, which, however tenuously, had contained Western drama since antiquity, are cast aside. Faust exceeds even the scope of Homeric and Virgilian epic, outreaches even the cosmic vision of Dante, and it does so while drawing on the entire gamut of stylistic registers, from blank obscenity to mystical conceit, from learned allusion to ludic nonsense. In view of this abundance, the usual criteria of dramatic unity fail us in our attempt to understand Goethe's Faust, and we must look elsewhere for generic comparisons. A suggestive case is the genre of the encyclopedia, which of course achieved one of its pinnacles, the Encyclopédie of d'Alembert and Diderot, in Goethe's lifetime. The ambition of an encyclopedia is to map not the world, not an action, but knowledge in all its manifestations. It is a meta-epistemic genre that collects, displays, and orders all that practical, scientific, aesthetic, psychological, social, and religious inquiry has achieved. Several of Goethe's romantic contemporaries, most notably the poet Novalis and the philosopher Hegel, worked at encyclopedias that, rather than simply arrange knowledge in an alphabetical array, actually tried to unfold its inner structure, a structure that rests finally in the capacities and development of the knowing subject. The encyclopedic form, true to its etymology, is transformed in such a way as to chart the course of the epistemic subject through the various levels of knowledge, a course that is circular, since it leads back finally to that knowing subject itself, culminating in the knowledge of knowledge. In Goethe's Faust, then, and this is the second answer to our question after his identity, who is Faust? In Goethe's Faust, we have the embodiment and dramatic figuration of this epistemic subject. This is why the play is first and foremost a document of staggering erudition. And that erudition embraces the history of literature as well, the unity and inner order of which the Romantic age had for the first time brought into view. It interweaves the legend of Faust with the book of Job and the Gospel of John. The section on Gretchen recapitulates the bourgeois tragedy with a generous measure of Shakespearean technique. In part 2, ancient myth, Homeric epic, Attic tragedy, and medieval love poetry, the operas of Monteverdi, Renaissance pastoral, Calderon's plays, the courtly masque, and Dante's religious vision all make their presence felt. The versification is a virtual catalog of metrical and strophic forms from antiquity to Goethe's time. The protagonist, whom we first see with a book of Nostradamus on his desk, disappears from sight at the drama's end in a vision drawn from the church father Origen. Faust is a book that connects many books in a vast and intricate semantic network. Its encyclopedic course charts the space of European cultural memory. Faust is emerging for us as the figure of modern knowledge as seen from the perspective of Romanticism. A comparison can bring us closer to this figure and to the pulse of his identity. If we consider all the works on Faust that have been written since Johann Spiess's 1587 chapbook, not just the works by Marlowe, Goethe, and Mann that I mentioned before, but those of Lessing, of Heine, of Grabe, of Pushkin, of Thomas Carlyle, of Turgenev, of Pessoa, of Valéry, of Bulgakov, and even of the American beatnik poet Michael McClure. Furthermore, if we consider all the representations of Faust in the visual arts, the most famous being perhaps the illustration to Goethe's Faust by Delacroix and by Max Beckmann. Finally, if we consider all the musical renditions of Faust, which include works by Beethoven, Berlioz, Schumann, Gounod, Liszt, Mendelssohn, Mussorgsky, Pfitzner, Wagner, Mahler, and Schnittke. If we consider all these artistic works together with the popular tradition of tales, chapbooks, puppet shows, and most recently, films, then we notice that the figure of Faust belongs to no one work or genre or artistic medium, that it exists in perpetual transformation, and that across all these transformations it remains a focus of abiding fascination. It is an interesting question whether the modern world, the world disclosed by scientific inquiry, the disenchanted world, as Max Weber called it, is a world that can include myth as part of its self-understanding. But if an affirmative answer to this question is indeed possible, then a primary candidate for the status of modern myth would certainly be the Faust story. Perhaps Goethe understood this. And perhaps it was for this reason that his play juxtaposes a properly Faustian Walpurgis Night with a classical Walpurgis Night that rehearses for us an entire world of classical mythology, culminating in the conception of Helen in the union of Leda and Zeus disguised as swan. Be that as it may, if we consider Faust as a mythic figure of modernity, then we can begin to understand his significance by employing the primary tool of mythic analysis, the tool of structural comparison. We need to see Faust, in other words, in juxtaposition with his mythic counterfigure. But who might this be? Eckermann, the chronicler of Goethe's Conversations, records a remark of the poet's that contains a suggestive clue. A musical version of his Faust, Goethe claimed, was no longer imaginable since Mozart was no longer alive to compose it. The thrust of this remark is clear. On Goethe's view, the appropriate composer for Faust could be no other than the composer of Don Giovanni. The modern counter-myth to Faust, a myth that, like that of Faust, lives in countless artistic and popular transformations, is the myth of Don Juan. What emerges into view for us if we juxtapose these two modern myths, the myths of Faust and of Don Juan? I want to say that what they have in common is that they each carve out a domain of experience we can call uniquely modern by virtue of the absoluteness with which it is pursued. These domains are the experiential sectors of knowledge on the one hand, and love, sexual love that is, on the other. The crucial point here, of course, is the absoluteness, the unconditional quality of the investment. The fact, that is, that each type of experience unfolds autonomously, without obedience to any authority, social, moral, or religious, without respect for any value external to the project itself. We moderns, these two myths tell us, are capable of being animated by what might be called a mono-obsession, the one cause that ignores and even obliterates all other concerns. Modernity is that historical space in which knowledge and sexual love each achieve such status. Neither Faust nor Don Juan is a rebel. They don't seek to overturn the existing normative order, they merely disregard it. Traditional codes, commitments, and sanctions no longer have a grip on them, no longer hold their actions in check. This casts light on the significance of the Faustian pact with the devil, which in Goethe continues in the form of the wager. For Faust's calculation must be that the unchecked pursuit of his earthly project has an absolute value in itself, trumping even the value of the soul's eternal salvation. And Don Giovanni's refusal to repent at the conclusion of Mozart and Da Ponte's masterpiece, the scream of no that accompanies his descent into the fires of hell, bespeaks the same uncompromising investment in a project that only makes sense with respect to earthly existence. In modernity, these two myths tell us knowledge and sexuality become projects that are inherently, one might say structurally, transgressive, and that, as both Goethe's Faust and Mozart da Ponte's Don Giovanni amply demonstrate, and that leave much destruction in their wake. Against the background of overarching similarity that unites the two modern myths, however, differences emerge that enable us to see them not merely as distinct, but as forming a polarity of meaning. The differences in question bear in particular on the quality of subjective experience each mythic figure embodies. Don Juan lives fully in immediacy. For this reason, he is without memory. Da Ponte's ingenious libretto brings this out in the famous catalog aria sung by Leporello with its refrain of 1013, 1003, the 1003 conquests Don Giovanni has made in Spain alone. For the point is that it is Leporello, it's Leporello, not Don Giovanni, who records each seduction. From the Don's perspective, the seriality of erotic conquest is not a cumulative affair, but a perpetual movement from one moment to another, each of which presents itself as absolute, as both first and last, obliterating all others. If Don Giovanni is the mythic figure of the sensuous erotic quest emancipated from social, moral, and religious constraints, then this emancipation takes the form of an absolutization of the present moment of experience. Perhaps this is what seduction means, the captivation by what is present here and now, regardless of promises, oaths, or commitments, regardless of anything that could bind the present moment to a past or a future, and thereby delimit its possibilities. Don Giovanni, for it's the opera I'm taking here as the paradigmatic exploration of the Don Juan myth, much as I take Goethe's play as the paradigmatic instantiation of the Faust myth, Don Giovanni, we might say, is absolutely faithful to every moment within that moment, and therefore enduringly faithful to none, and of course to no one. Faust's experience, it turns out, is structured quite differently. Goethe's Faust, we said, is an immense cultural archive. And this is appropriate to a figure who, as it were, stands at a reflective distance from the world and indeed from his own experience. This doesn't necessarily mean that he's always thinking or theorizing, although this is sometimes true. What I'm trying to get at, rather, is the peculiar double structure of Faust's experience. The fact that it is the experience that it is, plus the experience of that experience. Was der ganzen Menschheit zugeteilt is what he expects from his wager with Mephisto and his plunge into worldliness. Translated, the entirety of experience apportioned to humanity, with its heights and its depths, its joys and its despair. But to have an experience for the sake of experiencing it is not to be within that experience at all. It is to be an onlooker, a sort of tourist in one's own life. Goethe's Faust loves Gretchen, to be sure, and that love is not merely a sentimental, soulful affair, but rather a deeply sexual love that carries the two well outside the sphere of social and moral norms. Nonetheless, the difference to Don Giovanni could hardly be greater. Whereas the Spaniard loves the woman with whom he finds himself in this very moment, Faust loves his love of Gretchen, loves the experience that comes to him through her. Faust loves, we might say, in order to have loved. Whether we want to call that sort of loving love at all is a terminological question. What is clear, though, is that it is a very different sort of experiential structure than the one Don Giovanni embodies. Just as the immediacy of sensuality that characterizes Don Giovanni's experience expresses itself in a particular attitude toward the present moment, so too does Faust's reflective stance toward experience reveal its inner character most clearly as an attitude toward time. Goethe understood this, and he therefore brought out the Faustian relationship to time in his rendering of the very crux of the Faust story, namely the pact with the devil. I've already noted that in its traditional formulation, the pact signifies a weighing of earthly and temporal life against eternity, whereby, and that's the core of the myth's modernity, whereby the earthly world takes precedence even if the fatal error of that calculation becomes manifest on collection day 24 years later. By abandoning the plot arrangement of the pact or contract, Goethe also scraps, and this fact must be felt in its full significance, Goethe also scraps the premise of an eternal afterlife. A contract with the devil that repays diabolical services rendered in this world with the soul's eternal obedience just makes no sense, because that other world, the eternal one, has significance neither for Faust nor for the play as a whole. We're in a world of pure immanence here, and this is why the pact must be transformed into a wager. And this wager has to do with time, in particular with the present moment of experience. Here is Faust's formulation of the bet. He's offering the wager now to Mephisto, to the devil. Werde ich zum Augenblicke sagen, verweile doch, du bist so schön. Dann magst du mich in Fesseln schlagen, dann will ich gern zugrunde gehen. And now, in the verse of your favorite translator, if I should say to the moment, but Terry, you are so beautiful, then you might as well bind me in chains, then I will gladly go to my demise. The interpretation of these 4 lines is without a doubt the most disputed issue in all of Goethe scholarship, and probably in all of German literary scholarship as well. So I'm asking you to go out on a hermeneutic limb with me that will probably get thinner and thinner the further we proceed. I start by noting that the wager is set up in such a way that the eventuality determining its outcome is a certain attitude to the present moment, namely, the attitude expressed in the words, but Terry, linger, you are so beautiful. If Faust says this, or I suppose even feels this, then it would seem he loses the bet and Mephisto wins. But what does it mean? What does it mean to say this to the moment? Well, one answer is it means to be perfectly happy. Goethe, you see, is alluding to a passage in Rousseau's Fifth Reverie, where the solitary promeneur, as Rousseau calls him, defines absolute happiness. Such happiness in which the soul is fully at one with itself and neither yearns for the past nor anticipates the future, occurs, Rousseau says, at that moment when the heart can truly say to itself, I wish this moment would always last. Being able to say that, and to say it with the heart's full conviction, is, on Rousseau's interpretation, just what it means to be fully happy. Happiness, then, is a certain relationship to time. Let's call it full absorption in the present moment, looking neither forward nor back. And let's recall now that dialogue between Faust and Helen that I cited earlier. Faust, the mind looks neither back nor beyond this. This present time alone, Helen, is purest bliss. That would seem to be the fulfillment of the Rousseauian stipulation on happiness, and it would seem also to answer to Goethe's slight modification of Rousseau's formulation, which specifies the internal quality of the moment of happiness as the experience of beauty. But Terry, you are so beautiful. For what is Helen if not the embodiment of beauty? And finally, it would also seem to be the moment when Faust fully coincides with himself, is at one with himself in his oneness with and love for Helen, as indicated by his name, Faustus, the happy or fortunate one. But of course, this entire scene with Helen is the artifact of Mephistophelian machinations. It is a theatrical phantasmagoria, and it comes collapsing down at the third act's end. The aspect of mourning, which is to say of loss, inherent in the modern historicist experience of beauty, reasserts itself. The spell is broken, and Faust, therefore, has not lost the wager, has not truthfully and with full conviction said to the moment, "But Terry, you are so beautiful." What if he had? What if the moment of true happiness had come? Well, in the terms of the wager, Faust would have lost and Mephistopheles would have won. But what would winning and losing mean here? Faust, in losing the wager, would have won in an altogether different sense. He would have found eternity within the moment. He would have experienced the full presence of beauty. He would have experienced unassailable happiness. No other moment could count for him. No other moment could possibly matter. Could this possibly be considered as losing? Isn't this just the condition of having nothing to lose? Since there's nothing more to be had, and since the experienced moment is unshakably secure in itself, and isn't this, in fact, what Faust says when he states what would follow upon his loss of the bet? Quoting him again, "Then you might as well bind me in chains, then I will gladly go to my demise." I will gladly go. Faust doesn't mean here to state an outcome that would be disastrous or deleterious that he's trying to avoid. He's stating an outcome that's a matter of total indifference to him. Do you see the intricacy, perhaps the cunning even, of this entire wager? If Faust does not achieve the moment of happiness, then he wins the bet. And if he does achieve the moment of happiness, then he has nothing to lose. One almost feels sorry for Mephistopheles. There's just no way he can come out on top here. So what's the point of the wager, we might well ask? An answer to that question, I think, will have to look something like this. The wager is a dramatic device for expressing the nature of Faustian temporality, which we can now see is the opposite of Don Juan's temporal experience. For Don Juan, every moment makes an absolute claim on him, just as every woman does, but this means that no moment is lasting, which accounts, by the way, for the frantic tempo of Don Juan's life, so beautifully expressed by Mozart. For Faust, however, no moment can make an absolute claim on him, because each, however sufficient, is insufficient in relation to another imagined moment of complete fulfillment. This accounts for his unappeasable striving. Don Juan's experience of sensuous immediacy absolutizes every moment. Faust's reflective stance toward his experience relativizes every moment. Both of them, therefore, though for the opposite reason, are ceaselessly driven beyond themselves. Neither of them can come to rest. Neither of them can find a home in the world. Modernity, the great critic Georg Lukács wrote in 1916, is the condition of transcendental homelessness. And something like that condition of structural exile and vagabondage is embodied in the figure of Faust, who at one point calls himself der Unbehauste, the one without a house. That epithet doesn't refer to a real estate problem. It characterizes Faust rather as one for whom the world as such offers no sheltering enclosure. For Faust, whom we have come to know as the mythic figuration of a modern form of subjectivity, the world is not a place to which he can belong. Our original question, who is Faust, has found not a single answer, but a series of answers. Faust is the embodiment of the modern consciousness of art. Faust is the subject of modern knowledge and cultural memory. Faust is the mythic counterfigure to Don Juan. Faust embodies the commitment to immanence as opposed to eternity and the relativization of the present moment. Faust is the reflective subject who stands at a distance from his experience, a tourist in his own life. Faust is the modern vagabond, transcendently homeless. It's this last point that I want to conclude with, for it enables us, I think, to understand one of the unsolved mysteries of Goethe's Faust drama. That mystery can be formulated as follows. Why does Goethe center the fifth and final act of Part 2? That is to say, the conclusion of the entire drama, the conclusion of 60-plus years of work, the conclusion of this summa summarum of European culture. Why does he center the fifth and final act of Part 2 on a redaction of the story of Philemon and Baucis, the elderly couple who, in Ovid's Metamorphoses, provide shelter to Jupiter and Mercury and are repaid with the transformation of their modest hut into a temple, and then with a death that sweetly transforms them into intertwined oak and linden trees? Goethe transforms the story, of course. The scene is now a colonial realm at the edge of the sea. Faust's grandiose engineering project has pushed back the sea, recovered a broad swath of fertile land on which a vibrant republic of free men has been established. Faust's long career has culminated in an order we can recognize as our own: near technical mastery over the chaotic turbulence of nature, political self-determination, a flourishing economy rooted in industry and trade. The vision is compelling in its sweep. Faust has indeed revealed himself as the modern subject, the subject that is of a technical, political, economic regime that is the product of concerted human will and as such the realization of freedom. Of course, this is all tinged with a strain of Mephistophelian evil, but so powerful is the utopian vision that these elements seem almost like accidents or corrigible defects left over from an earlier stage of development. It's both the scope of this vision and its resolute modernism that are the source of the mystery here. For there seems to be no answer to this question: why, at the height of this sweeping poetic vision of modernity, recur to the pre-modern, and even for Ovid's audience, transparently sentimental tale of the elderly couple, Philemon and Baucis? For Faust, you see, is driven to intolerable distraction by the fact that there, in the middle of this modern creation, and in fact, with the very best view of the land now freed from the sea, that there sits that tiny hut of the elderly couple, and next to it their rickety chapel with the annoying ding-dong-ding of its little bell. That drives Faust mad. That they are there. That his self-created world is marred by this one remaining reminiscence of another order of things. He sends Mephistopheles to remove the elderly couple from the hut, to resettle them in a much nicer home. But they, although frail, resist. Mephistopheles and his thuggish henchmen end up killing them and immolating them, their house, and of course the chapel too. No more ding-dong-ding. Mephistopheles and his gang are the executioners of Faust's will. This then is Faust's last act, the torching of a home, a murder committed in the course of a forced resettlement. And the mystery of it all, of course, is why end there? Why round out this most comprehensive play and poem in the history of European literature with what looks like a gratuitous act of violence staged within an inherited mythological set piece? In Ovid's Metamorphosis, Philemon and Baucis are honored, and their house is transformed into a temple. In Goethe's Faust, they are murdered, and their house is destroyed. Why is this the case? Who is Faust that this is his last act? A moment's reflection tells us that we already have the answer in hand. Philemon and Baucis, this is their literary mythical function, are the figures of hospitality. In contrast to all their neighbors, they welcome Zeus and Mercury into their modest abode, provide them with a simple meal. But in this welcome and in this shared table, this commensurality, there is an abundance worthy of the gods themselves. That abundance is the gift of this very moment, of this food and this home, all of which they share in their hospitality with their guests. And now the significance of Faust's final act emerges into view for us. Faust's ruthless razing of the hut and chapel, his murder of the aged couple, is the destruction of the possibility of experiencing the world as home, the destruction of the world's hospitality. And in this sense, it is appropriate as the final expression of Faust's nefarious wager with time. For it is this very wager that has made Faust constitutively, or as Lukács says, transcendentally homeless. Homeless, that is, in the world. Faust is unable to receive the gift of hospitality. He is unable to receive the gift of the world. It is just that gift, the gift of sheltering enclosure in this moment of time, the gift that enriches even the gods, that the very form of Faust's experience precludes. There it was, that gift of the eternal moment, the gift of the world, the chance to be truly Faustus, the fortunate, the happy one, sitting here with this elderly, generous couple. And it cannot be received. Faust's heart cannot say with conviction, "But Terry, you are so beautiful." Like Oedipus before him, Faust is rendered at the play's end blind. He cannot see the world and the world's gift. Modernity, in its mono-obsession, Faust's tragic end tells us, incinerates the house of hospitality, sets the richest of all gifts, the gift of the present moment, into flame. Thank you very much. Thank you.